Welcome to our presentation today on the first CARE Act annual report. My name is Lauren Niles Whalen, and I'm a principal with Health Management Associates working on the CARE Act Data Team, which is the team that supports DHCS to develop this report, the annual report, as well as support data collection and reporting efforts for CARE. Our agenda for today includes an overview of findings from the first CARE Act annual report, which covers the first 9 months of CARE implementation. We'll also be providing an overview of updates to the CARE Act legislation, which will impact data collection and reporting requirements. And as a reminder, we'll speak a little bit about some data collection and reporting resources that are available to counties and other stakeholders. Let's first take a look at the annual report findings. DHCS is required to develop an annual report to examine the scope of CARE Act implementation and monitor the performance of this implementation. The report is distinct from the 3- and 5-year independent evaluations of CARE that the RAND Corporation will be conducting. The first CARE Act annual report, which is now available on the DHCS website and can be accessed using the QR code on the screen now, includes findings from the first 9 months of implementation, including key takeaways and opportunities to leverage those findings. The report is accompanied by an implementation update and a few videos from the California Health and Human Services Agency, or CalHHS, that go into more details about how CARE is making a difference across the state. And those resources are really meant to be used as a set of companion resources to the annual report. The overall objective of this report is to provide an overview of early CARE Act implementation by the courts and county behavioral health agencies, as well as identify potential areas for program enhancements. Specifically, the report provides insights into the volume of CARE petitions that have flowed to the courts, the volume of CARE respondents that are sent to county behavioral health agencies from the courts, characteristics of the CARE respondents, services and supports accessed among those with a CARE agreement or CARE plan, county behavioral health agency capacity to meet CARE participant needs, which we'll define in a little bit, and then also county provision of services to elective clients, who are those who have voluntarily engaged in services and supports with the county outside of court jurisdiction. Importantly, the data that's leveraged for this first annual report corresponds with the data points that were specified in Data Dictionary 1.0 and reported for the period covering October 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. Again, that's the first 9 months of CARE Act implementation. There are 2 main sources of data. The first is aggregate data reported on CARE petitions and hearings from the Judicial Council. And the second is individual level data on CARE respondents served by county behavioral health agencies, and that's reported from those agencies. In terms of time frame, the time frame for data in this report, as I mentioned, is the first 9 months or 3 reporting periods of CARE implementation. When it comes to the population here, counties are reporting data to us. The counties that are reporting data to us that were used in this report include the 7 Cohort 1 counties that implemented starting in October 2023. You can see those here on the screen. As well as LA County, who began implementing starting in December 2023. Starting first with the data reported from the Judicial Council, or JC, which is the volume of CARE petitions through the CARE courts. Overall, what we saw were there were 556 CARE petitions filed during the first 9 months of CARE and were received by the courts as of June 30th, 2024. Of those filed CARE petitions, 101, or 18%, resulted in an approved CARE agreement or ordered CARE plan, and about 40%, just under, were dismissed. For this first annual report, we had to combine CARE agreements and CARE plans together to ensure we met data privacy requirements. In future annual reports, we do hope to be able to present those separately so folks can kind of see the difference. The remainder of filed CARE petitions were still in court review processes at the time of this report development and pending that first disposition assignment. The other thing we want to point out is there were nearly 800 total CARE hearings held during this time period, including 403 initial appearances. We think it's important to spend just a moment orienting everyone to how petitions flow through the courts down to county behavioral health agencies, including how dispositions are assigned by courts and the county action that's taken following that. So of the total 556 petitions that were submitted to the courts that we spoke about on the previous slide, 497 care petitions were received by county behavioral health agencies during that first 9 months of care. Of note, this represents 490 unique care respondents. So for this portion of the analysis, we're actually moving from a petition-based analysis to an individual-based analysis. So it goes from 497, and we'll be using the number 490 moving forward. Why we see this discrepancy between total petitions at the court level and what we see here at the county level is because courts can dismiss a petition for not meeting eligibility criteria for care proceedings prior to county behavioral health involvement at all. County behavioral health agencies are really just responsible for identifying and tracking care petitions that either they file themselves or those that they are ordered to investigate by the courts. Once a county receives a petition from the court, they're required to report monthly on that petitioned individual during their care initiation period, which you see up here at the top in light blue, and their active service period, which is the kind of aqua color you see here. If a respondent is dismissed and found to not be eligible for care, counties are no longer required to report on them. You can see here that over the first 9 months of implementation, the average time from petition to disposition was about 2.5 months, or 76 calendar days. And of those 490 unique care respondents that flowed to county behavioral health agencies, 160 were dismissed by the care court. Among those 160 that were dismissed, 15 became elective clients, 55 were found to be ineligible for care but received county behavioral health services, 90 were found to be ineligible for care and did not receive any county services. An additional 101 care respondents were found to meet care eligibility requirements and had a care plan ordered or care agreement approved by the courts. These respondents are now called care participants in this report, and they move down into their active service period, where they're tracked for a minimum of 12 months, followed by another 12 months of tracking in their follow-up period. And this is the same as what we do for elective clients who are dismissed from the courts but are receiving county services and supports and were found to be care eligible. So you can see that down here, this 15 elective clients. At the end of the period included in this report, petitions for 229 respondents still remained under evaluation without that first disposition assignment by the courts. So let's talk a little bit about the origin of care petitions. Care petitions can be filed by a range of individuals. The annual report provides data and breaks down the petitioner types for these first 9 months. What we saw was a little over 2/3 or 68% of care petitions were petitioned by what we call a personal petitioner. So that's a spouse or a domestic partner, family member, etc. We found about 22% were petitioned by a system partner. So that includes hospital directors, licensed behavioral health professionals, public guardians, and the like. About 7% were filed by a mobile crisis team, outreach worker, or first responder. And then just about 3% were filed by the respondent themselves, so a self-petition. Sorry about that. With regard to the racial makeup of care respondents, we found that over a third identified as white, 21% identified as Hispanic, 18% identified as Black, and 7% identified as Asian. For this data point, I just want to point out that respondents can be identified as more than one race and show up in more than one category. So these are not going to sum to 100%. Here we can see the breakdown of care respondents by ethnicity. So we see that about 50% are not Hispanic. We saw about 16% identified as other Hispanic or Latino, about 11% identified as Mexican or Mexican American, and then about 22% unknown. The majority of care respondents were between the ages of 26 and 45 years old. That was just about 2/3. followed by that 46 to 65-year bracket, which represented about a quarter of respondents. When it came to the sex of respondents, we found that about a third were female and about 2/3 were male. We had very little unknown or missing data for this. We also wanted to take a look at a few social characteristics of the respondents. And so you can see a few of those here, looking at employment status, insurance status, and then housing. When it came to employment status, what we found was of the 490 unique care respondents, 7% were reported to be in the unpaid workforce. So that includes things like student, retired folks, folks that are looking for work. But the largest proportion of care respondents' employment status was in the other category, and that represented about 60% of the responses we received, with the most common descriptors in the free text field noting the respondent was unemployed or not seeking work or unable to work due to a disability. With regard to insurance status, we found that about half of care respondents reported being Medi-Cal enrollees, and a small proportion reported being Medicare enrollees, so about 6% at the time of their petitioning. For this variable, we did see a high number of unknown values being returned, so that represented about 43% of respondents. When it comes to housing or living situation at the time of petitioning, we found that about 2/3 of participants or respondents were housed at the time of petitioning. Most respondents were reported to be in permanent housing. That represented about 41% of respondents, rather than institutional, which is about 16%, or temporary housing, which represented about 8%. For this, we also saw that about 30% of respondents were unhoused at the time of petitioning, and 3% had an unknown housing or living situation. To get a sense of how long petitioned folks were remaining in the court process prior to first disposition assignment, we took a look at the average time from petitioning to first disposition. What we found was, on average, it was about 76 calendar days, or approximately 2.5 months, with a very wide range of days, 8 to 253, observed among respondents. Individuals with a care agreement or plan did take slightly longer, on average about 6 days, than folks that were dismissed clients to receive that first disposition. Of the 261 care respondents with a petition disposition, about 85% took 31 or more days, about a month, to have a petition disposition assigned. We want to note that during a respondent's care process initiation period, really a range of activities can be occurring simultaneously. So things like outreach and engagement, service and support delivery, county investigation, and information gathering for the courts for the purpose of that disposition assignment, as well as trust building with the respondent. As we think towards future annual reports, we will include the information about the extent of county behavioral health outreach and engagement efforts, as well as services and supports provided during that initiation period, as we'll be collecting additional data as required in Senate Bill 1400 that asked for this particular type of data. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. In the next section here, we'll present data on the types of services and supports that were accessed by care participants. For this report, we defined access as a care participant being enrolled in or having documented receipt of a service or support at some point during their active service period. This first annual report focuses on point-in-time access due to really the short span of time that care participants spent in their active service period over these first few months of CARE Act implementation. That was about 3 months on average that folks contributed to their active service period. And so that really limited our ability to observe trends over time in service and support utilization and engagement. But we did want to also let you know that for future annual reports, we will hope to expand upon this and do that more kind of trending analysis. So let's start by talking a little bit about access to specialized programs. 3/4 of care participants, which is about 76%, were reported to be enrolled in a specialized program at some point in their active service period. The most accessed specialized program was ACT, or Assertive Community Treatment, with nearly half of care participants enrolling in ACT or engaging in ACT at some point during their active service period. The second most accessed specialized program was Full Service Partnership, or FSP, with nearly a third of care participants enrolled in FSP during their active service period. Here you can see some data on service and support access among care participants. The most common service type that was accessed by care participants was mental health treatment services, with about 93% of care participants receiving at least one mental health treatment service during their active service period. When we looked at the top or most commonly accessed mental health services, what we saw was targeted case management and medication support were the most accessed. The majority of participants also received stabilizing medication, that was about 72%, as well as social services and supports, which represented about 60%. The least commonly received service type was substance use disorder treatment services, and only 16% of care participants accessed a California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal, or CalAIM, community support, which are a set of supports and services that are really meant to address the social determinants of health for residents, as well as improve the well-being of individuals with complex needs. Because engagement in evidence-based treatment is difficult when an individual is unhoused or unstably housed, a critical component of the CARE Act is to promote access to a diverse range of housing services and supports. We observed that 15% of care participants received a CalAIM housing service or support, and 31% received a housing service or support that was funded through county, state, or federal programs at some point during their active service period. Collectively, 3 evidence-based components of care form the recovery supporting services that are tracked as a measure of CARE Act success, and those are stabilizing medications, comprehensive psychosocial and community-based treatments, and housing supports. 63% of care participants received all 3 of those key services and supports during their active service period, and 28% received 2 of the 3 key services and supports. Of the participants that received 2 of the 3 services and supports, the most commonly observed combination was housing supports and psychosocial and community-based treatment. For the purposes of this analysis, a care participant was counted as having housing supports if they, one, accessed a housing support program, so things like No Place Like Home or the California Housing Accelerator Program, or they received a CalAIM community housing support service, so things like housing transition navigation services or housing deposits, things like that. Or if the individual was housed in a permanent, temporary, or institutional housing setting. This slide here shows the number and proportion of care participants who had an event that may signal there is a need that's not being addressed within a community-based setting at some point during the participant's active service period. The most common unmet need that we saw was for securing and maintaining permanent housing. So at some point during the active service period for care participants, 28% were unhoused, 12% were temporarily housed, 20% were institutionally housed, and institutional housing, does include things like jail, prison, psychiatric facilities, etc. Other important indicators of unmet needs are in the second list below here. So at some point during their active service period, about a quarter of care participants had criminal justice involvement, about a fifth had an emergency department visit, a fifth had an inpatient hospitalization, and about a fifth had an LPS hold. We also want to mention that about 15% of data on these events was reported as unknown, suggesting that these challenges may be even more widespread than you see here. The CARE Act emphasizes 2 key features to support person-centered care for care participants, which are psychiatric advance directives, or PADs, and volunteer supporters. Specific to the CARE Act, PADS can be a useful tool to ensure services are delivered to an individual in alignment with their preferences throughout both their care court processes and beyond as they enter into active service. At the time of this report, there were no PADs that had been established for any care participant over the first 9 months of care implementation. A volunteer supporter is an adult chosen by the care respondent to provide support throughout the care process. Their role is to promote the respondent's preferences, choices, and autonomy, and help the respondent understand and make decisions and communicate those decisions during the care proceedings. The person can be any adult selected by the respondent, so it could be a family member, a friend, a homeless outreach worker, or even a peer. As shown in the chart that you see on this slide, about a third of care participants and 8% of care respondents elected to have a volunteer supporter. We also were able to take a look at who those respondent volunteer supporters were, and what we found was about 80% were family members. We also want to note that this data refers exclusively to the volunteer supporter role, which is separate from peer involvement in treatment teams or outreach teams, which many counties have incorporated into their care work as well. During the first 9 months of care, 15 petitioned individuals that were care eligible were diverted to receive county services and supports outside of the court, and these are referred to as elective clients. Elective clients received overall fewer services than care participants, but also had more data quality issues, especially data missingness, than care participants. And I think one of the things we're grappling with on the data side is that this may reflect inherent challenges with tracking individuals outside of court jurisdiction. Overall, we found that elective clients refused fewer services than care participants, with only mental health treatment services and SUD treatment services being accessed by this group. Half of elective clients were enrolled in ACT, but we did not see any enrolled in FSP or FACT services. With regard to the 3 evidence-based services and supports that provide critical foundations for recovery, so again, that's stabilizing medications, psychosocial and community-based treatment, and housing supports, very, very few elective clients received all 3 of these services and supports. There are some data limitations that we'd like to note, specifically inconsistencies between county behavioral health and court data. So what we did observe was there were discrepancies between county behavioral health and JC reported counts of care plans ordered and care agreements approved. In terms of how we've communicated this and hope to help solution here, county behavioral health agencies have been encouraged to work with their care courts to identify opportunities to improve coordination and alignment of their submitted data. The second data limitation that we wanted to mention was that we did observe missing or unknown data being reported by all county behavioral health agencies, though we do want to say that this represented less than 1% of all the reported data. When we took a look at the missing and unknown responses, we found that missingness was not random. We saw higher missingness for elective clients, as well as among certain data points. The challenges with data missingness and unknown data may reflect challenges that county behavioral health agencies face in tracking individuals outside of court jurisdiction, which we spoke about earlier. It may also reflect some sensitivities about reporting certain information, for example, substance use, due to privacy regulations. And you can see over on the right hand of the side some of the most common missing and unknown data points. So for missing data, we saw high missingness among employment status, presence of a volunteer supporter, housing support funding, frequency of secondary substance use, and number of arrests. And for unknown values, we saw the most frequently reported unknowns for misuse of illegal and controlled substances, diagnosis of substance use disorder. So now that we've taken a look at the data in the annual report, we want to discuss some of the key takeaways and opportunities to leverage these findings. The majority of care participants and respondents engaged were males between the ages of 26 and 45, indicated English as their preferred language, 40% just about were white, 20% Hispanic, about 20% Black, and 7% Asian. These findings really suggest a need to expand efforts to raise awareness about care, especially for particular populations. Efforts should focus on the public as well as those involved in CARE Act implementation and should be aligned with ensuring equitable access to care for potentially eligible individuals. Thinking about specific opportunities to leverage these findings, some of the things we are recommending are expanding efforts to raise awareness about the CARE Act, especially among system partners and other potential petitioners who may be well positioned to refer and connect individuals to care. Another is to expand outreach and engagement efforts in CARE Act implementation, ensuring equitable access for eligible individuals who may be difficult to reach due to potentially limited English proficiency or folks that are experiencing homelessness, etc. The next takeaway is that care processes, like all mental health and substance use disorder treatment, just may require time to build trust and develop person-centered plans that are really needed for long-term stability and recovery. We found that the petition process for care respondents was not uniform, with the time from petitioning to first disposition assignment taking between 2 and 3 months on average. And for 85% of respondents, the time to disposition took over a month. Some of the opportunities to leverage these findings include continuing to aid courts, counties, and system partners to optimize and improve care processes, as well as to expand data collection to include new data on referrals from key system partners to promote access among potentially eligible individuals, as well as gathering data on outreach and engagement efforts that can help improve care process efficiencies. The next key takeaway from the annual report is that 2/3 of care participants received the 3 evidence-based services and supports that provide foundational and critical components of recovery. So stabilizing medication, comprehensive psychosocial and community-based treatments, as well as housing supports. We did note that across all services and support types, elective clients did access services at lower rates than care participants, and very few of them received all 3 of these foundations. This may suggest that care civil processes and court oversight associated with care plans and agreements, so those that are participants, may actually enhance client access and engagement in services and improve county accountability to engage these folks. We did also notice that psychiatric advance directives and volunteer supporters were greatly underutilized over this first 9 months of care implementation. As we mentioned before, there were no pads established for any care participants, and just about 1/3 of participants had an assigned volunteer supporter. When thinking about opportunities to leverage these findings, some of the things that came to mind were to expand TA efforts to promote awareness of best practices and improve access to all 3 foundations for recovery, as well as promote the use of pads and volunteer supporters. Additionally, continue to identify opportunities to reduce undesirable encounters with criminal justice, law enforcement, and acute care settings, as well as expand county data collection to include new data that will allow for a more robust analysis of access to and quality of care among folks that are petitioned to care who receive different dispositions. We next want to touch on some recent updates to CARE Act legislation that have impacted the data collection and reporting process. In particular, there are 2 legislative updates that have implications for CARE Act data collection and reporting, and those are Senate Bill 42 and 1400. SB 14, or we'll start with SB 42. This legislation amended provisions of the CARE Act, including referrals by facilities to county behavioral health, communication between courts, alternatives to conservatorship, changes to care procedures, and collaboration on system performance. SB 1400 amended provisions of the Penal Code related to care referrals of individuals that are deemed incompetent to stand trial. There are some briefings on these 2 legislative updates that are available to you using the links here, and also available to you on the CARE Act Resource Center. Related to CARE Act data reporting, these two bills require DHCS beginning in 2026 to include additional data in the annual report that is posted on their website. These additional data include and are to be started collecting on January 1, 2025 by counties, outreach and engagement efforts to both petitioned and referred individuals, outcomes and patterns of service access among individuals that were petitioned to CARE during the time period prior to court disposition assignment, county recommendations and court actions related to eligibility of petitioned individuals, and referrals from key system partners to promote access among potentially eligible individuals. These updates have been incorporated into a new data dictionary, Data Dictionary 2.0, and counties have successfully reported Q1 2025 data in accordance with these new data points and requirements. And finally, we want to end by speaking to some of the resources we have made available to counties related to data collection and reporting. To support county data collection and reporting, HMA has developed multiple resources, including a redesigned data collection and reporting resource page. This resource page, which is linked here, includes trainings and tools and resources to support reporting, as well as the transition to Data Dictionary 2.0. We also have on this resource page a supplemental guide with general and scenario-based guidance to counties on data collection and reporting. We also host ongoing bi-weekly data office hours with special topics each week, as well as just time for county representatives to come and ask questions about data collection and reporting, as well as get some thoughts and opinions from other counties. So it's really kind of almost a learning collaborative approach. Dedicated CARE Data Team email inbox. So you can see here, caredatateam@healthmanagement.com is the inbox that we use to monitor all incoming questions from counties, so please feel free to use that. In addition, we host trainings on demand, as they're needed, as topics arise. We just hosted one in this July, on data quality summary for the first quarter of 2025, really having a discussion with counties about some of the challenges that we observed in data quality using this new Data Dictionary 2.0 and having counties report in accordance with that. So again, if you have any questions related to data collection, data reporting, please reach out to us at caredatateam@healthmanagement.com. And we'd love to get in touch and answer any questions that you have. Thanks so much.